Welcome to the third panel session for this ARCASIA Forum 19 here in Jaipur. This session is focused on sustainable architecture, and we have in this session three distinguished invited speakers who would focus on sustainability in architecture through their own experience, research, and practice, and perhaps in a little different way, their own way. So we have three speakers, like I say: Rajiv Katpalia, Shevin Yildiz, and Madhura Prematilake from Sri Lanka. Rajiv is from India, Shevin is from USA. Rajiv Katpalia is involved with architecture, urban design, and planning projects throughout India for over 25 years as a partner at Vastu Shilpa Consultants. This critically acclaimed practice is the recipient of several international and national awards and honors, and its work has been published and exhibited extensively. In the recent past, it has won several national competitions for campuses in India, notably the IIM in Udaipur, and the international competition for the Nalanda University in Rajgir, Bihar. Most recently, VSC was one of the three practices invited globally to compete for the capital complex for Andhra Pradesh's new capital. Besides running an acknowledged practice, Rajiv has been teaching for the past 25 years. He is a member on the Board of Studies of several urban design faculties in India and has been a visiting faculty at CEPT University, Ahmedabad, and the School of Planning and Architecture's Urban Design Program, New Delhi. He is also the director and trustee of the Vastu Shilpa Foundation, a not-for-profit research organization in environmental and habitat design. The foundation's research has dealt extensively with slums, squatter settlements, relevant standards for these, and low-cost housing. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request architect Rajiv Katpalia to come over to the podium and deliver his presentation. Architect Rajiv Katpalia.
I'd like to thank ARCASIA to invite me this morning for this short presentation. And I've often wondered that are there ways to recognize in our architecture the forces of nature, its cyclical manifestation, and the philosophical underpinnings of our culture. It's a tall order. I think we all struggle with this. But as I sort of did certain things, I started understanding a little better, and I'll read you the kinds of, I'll explain to you the kinds of things that I've been looking at, and the kinds of structures that may allow us to sort of reach the kind of sustainability that we are talking about. If you look at Indian mythology, the personification of Lord Shiva, for instance, we may observe the evolution of Indian traditional thought of living in partnership with nature. Shiva is as old as Indian thought, and his origins are probably older than the Harappan culture he emerges from. He has mountains and wild places as a board. His entangled hair symbolizes the primeval untamed forest. The Ganga originating from his tresses depicts the watershed function of sacred groves. Serpents coiled around his neck symbolize coexistence with the denizens of the ecosystem. Snakes are a symbol of healing and primal energy. He symbolizes transformation, much as one season gives way to another, incorporating the elements of the bhutas from Mother Earth that sprout crops and grasses and once again forests. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna compares the world to a single banyan tree with unlimited branches in which all species of animals, humans and demigods wander. Indian epics such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are full of descriptions of trees and forests, as the people were always in a forest. The banyan tree is an apt metaphor of the forest. The banyan is unique among trees in that the branches sprout first and eventually bow down to the ground and become the roots of a new tree, each providing nourishment and stability to the entire tree. The tree is a single structure but functions like a complex, decentralized organization, providing shelter and nourishment to birds, beasts, and humans. Its multiple roots and branches represent multiple origins and sources, all parts of the same living organism, even if the whole cannot be comprehended at one glance. Each of the separate roots feeds every trunk, and hence every leaf is connected to the entire root system. There is no center of the tree, because multiple roots, trunks, and branches are all interlocked and inseparable. It is polycentric. And of course, it also represents the recycle of things. The seeds that drop, the flowers that come, the seeds that drop, the pods that fall and are transmitted by birds and other animals and sprout up again. And this recycling is what I think sustainability is about. Unlike many cultures where nature is seen as not supportive but profoundly threatening, an enemy to be tamed, civilized, and controlled, in our tradition, the forest is a place of refuge, hospitality, and profound spiritual inspiration. The forest has always been a symbol of beneficence in India, perhaps because the lush vegetation of the subcontinent offered refuge from the heat. Amongst the stages of life advocated for individuals, the penultimate one, in which the individual severs the bonds of family to pursue spiritual goals, is termed Vanaprastha, which literally means the forest stage of life. The forest can be the place for balancing order and chaos, and I think that's another very important aspect when we start talking about architecture. There is a tendency to order too many things simultaneously, and what we are trying to say is that the chaos is equally beneficial. Its thousands of species of animals, plants, and microorganisms are interdependent. A square foot of ground can contain the equivalent of a whole city of different life forms, including microscopic life. The microcosm at any given level is always connected with its enveloping macrocosm. So these are worlds within worlds, and they are not separated and isolated. To us in India, forest suggests fertility, plurality, adaptation, interdependence, and evolution. The forest loves to play host and is never closed to outsiders. Newer life forms that migrate to it are rehabilitated as natives. Everything starts belonging to each other. It grows organically with new life forms coexisting without destroying prior ones. It is never final and never complete. It is growing and changing and mutating. The experience of endless organic evolution is integral to the various schools of Indian philosophy, scriptures, deities, rituals, spiritual practices, and festivals. The idea of harmony arises from its interwovenness. Nature and its creatures are part of one cosmic family. The history of our subcontinent is its geography, if I may say so. It lies in the tropics, or the band between the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. The most important climate control in regard to the tropical climate types relates to the position of the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITCZ, line in blue that you see cutting across this. And I won't get into the details of that, you can look it up. The ITC is responsible for the municipals of the annual monsoons. In most parts of our country, the rains come once, stretching over 3 months. To gather this bounty of water, our ancestors gave rise to a civilization of water harvesters. I'm going to show you very briefly 2 projects that are intrinsically connected to these attitudes. One is a memorial for the earthquake victims in Bhuj in 2001, which is called Smriti 1. And the other one is the Nalanda University, which is in Rajgir, Bihar. And both these projects are about equal size. One started in 2004, the other one, and is still continuing 14 years later on, And the other one has recently started 4 years ago and also continues. So all these are things in progress. The Smriti 1 earthquake project started from a very simple brief: plant a tree for each victim. There were 13,805 people who perished in the earthquake, and for each of them, we had to plant a tree. The challenge was not planting a tree. Planting a tree in most cultures is a very simple thing. In most climates, extremely simple. In the place that I'm talking about, which is almost desert, where you get only 300 mm of rainfall, and that too once in 2 years, perhaps if you're lucky, planting a tree to sustain it is a difficult proposition. Most trees, even if you plant them, don't sustain. So the challenge was that it was not only about planting a tree, but the sustenance of the tree, and then to make a forest, to have diversity, to represent the vastness and diversity of this country. So a forest means biodiversity. It also means rebirth, plurality, adaptation, interdependence, evolution, transformation, and the celebration of life. All the things that make up society and its culture. This is a view of our site for most times of the year. And then the first monsoon rains, and this is what it transforms to. And so there's a lesson in that transformation. The soil is rich, all you need is the water. And so when we started looking very carefully at our site, we started looking at how the journey of water takes place. Every drop of water that falls onto this 470 acres, its journey. Because this journey is not only about the traversing of the terrain, it is how it picks up alluvium, how it picks up nutrients, and how it gathers. So this became the focus of what we started looking at. And then wherever these lines coalesced, so several monsoons, we looked at the coalesce of all these, and that's where we started collecting water. And then the other important part was that instead of collecting it in one large tank, making a huge, huge reservoir, we had many, many, many reservoirs. Many reservoirs means you can do them over time, you can do them slowly, you can do them very cheaply, and you don't have to build high reservoir walls. So we started building these leaking reservoirs, as we call them. The other part of the important this thing was the journey of people once they come to this. So much like in the ways that pilgrims go to pilgrimage spots and visit places from one to the other, how do they interconnect to the various spots that are there? What do they see and what do they experience? And so from that, a many layered master plan evolved. Of the kinds of trees, we identified 56 local species. We were told there were only one, but we identified, working with the Institute of Desert Ecology, 56 species local to the place, as well as in the surrounding regions of Gujarat, another 30 such species. So 86 species of trees are being planted out here. The system is quite simple. There are these reservoirs made of gabions. Gabions, as you know, is rock-filled baskets. And so it is just to arrest the water that flows from the hillside before it dissipates and evaporates, to charge it into the earth. And so the waters fill up, and over time they recharge the ground. And the root systems of the trees pick up that water and grow from that. And over time, as you will imagine, soils will come in, change this. The names of the victims incidentally happen along the walls of these reservoirs. And the reservoirs are designed that they connect you to the terrestrial realm when you're entering them. And as you step in, much like a step tank, your connection is only to the cosmic forces, to the sky and to the water below, and to your inner self, to reflect in this environment. And slowly, even these will become like little ruins, which are little follies or ruins that are there in the landscape, and become one with the landscape rather than standing out as objects in the landscape. So the idea is to bring about a transformation by doing the bare minimum to bring this about in a place where hardly any water exists. And eventually, this is what may become. This is where we are right now. You can see all the reservoirs that have been completed, the paths that have been connected, the planting goes on. This monsoon, most of the planting would be complete. And in another 2 years, you would start seeing the landscape emerging out of this. This is some of the insides of the reservoirs where I said the leaking check dam. So you can see the gabions, the steps as the water recedes down. It fills up in the monsoon to the top, overflows to the next one. And then as time goes by, it goes deeper and deeper inside and you have access to them. That's the last monsoon. And that has also become a social space where people come, weddings, childbirth, all of that, the local people come and plant a tree to commemorate the thing. So that there is a participation from everybody around in the surrounding areas and villages to really grow and make it their own, rather than as a government done project as such. This is how it's sort of growing. In that, there are several other things that are seeded. There is a place called the Sun Point, from where you see the sun rise and the sun set, and the moon rise and moon set on the hillock that is there. And this is the reverse of the reservoirs. Rather than going in, it floats above and it cuts off your this thing and gives you almost like the sky dome on top and the city below. And that's sunrise at that point. And this is how the lighting and all is coming up. So as I said, it's a project in progress. Slowly, it is coming together. If any of you want more information on it, there is a website which you can check on, and there is a small video that you can see which gives you more details about it. Yeah. The other project that I'm going to be talking about is the Nalanda University. And this is in Rajgir, Bihar. It's about 12 kilometers from the ancient ruins of the old Nalanda University. The Nalanda University, as some of you may know or may be aware of, is one of the oldest universities. As Mr. Reval mentioned, it is one of the oldest universities in the world. It was founded in the 4th century AD and was destroyed by the 12th century AD. In that time, it had scholars from all of Southeast Asia. It built up a network of world linkages for its scholarship. And there are the parts that have been excavated. The most evocative of these are the ruins of these stupas built in brick out there, and the viharas that abut that. The site that we have is abutted by 5 villages around, and you can see them in this Google image. There are those habitations which are spread all over. It's about 5 kilometers from the city of Rajgir, which is of about 30,000 people. In parts of it, it collects water. It's a strange site, and compared to the last one where there's 300 mm of rainfall, this one has 1200 mm of rainfall. It floods, so we have the reverse. We have an abundance of water rather than a paucity of water. When we started looking at this site, some of the things that were significant was, one was the backdrop to our site, which is the Rajgir Hills, which you can see in the background, the whole line of hills. These are very sacred hills. Gautam Buddha came and meditated here, and his first ceremonies were here. Mahavira came also and spent 14 years out here. So there is a linkages to the sacredness of the hill. We are on this flat plain that you see out here, and that is the water that is there pre-monsoon in some of the parts. Our idea was to connect the waters, because this is one of the largest net zero universities being attempted in the world. It's not a building, it's many, many buildings over many, many years that are being planned, and all are net zero, which means our water needs, our electrical power needs, our waste, all of that has to be recycled or generated within our site. So this is the initial sketch which before we won this competition. It was an international competition where there were, out of 80 participants, finally 8 were shortlisted to participate, out of which 5 were international things. And the idea of the drawing is to show a city much like our traditional cities, or around a tank of water, a sacred tank around which the city grows. Water, as most people think, is a simple thing. It's actually a fairly complex thing. The ways that you collect water becomes very, very important. It's not only the runoff generated, but how much soil is percolated, how much evaporation takes place. And even in the runoff generated from the rooftops, you get cleaner water. From the paved areas, you get less cleaner water. And the landscape runoffs, there is very little that you can collect. So all of these we took into this thing to balance out our water needs. And so the site of 455 acres or 198 hectares has almost 22% of it covered by wetlands and water bodies. The central tank, the holding ponds, and then several wetlands that cut through it and join it, almost like capillaries or veins that join this together. All our sewage is recycled. There is, this network becomes the basis of how we locate things. Along that, obviously, there are pedestrian paths, etc. It's a pedestrian-friendly university. Cars are parked on the periphery. You take battery-operated buses, you walk, or you cycle. The whole thing on 455 acres is within a circle of 10 minutes from its center to the periphery, so that it's comfortable to walk. So that's a minute of walking, 10 minutes from the furthest point to the center of the, and that sort of builds a compact city. One of these issues that we've been addressing is that how do you change the nature of our cities? And so all these experiments towards the ways that we are looking at our campuses is also sort of a precursor to how we could implement it, upscale it to the scale of the city. Road networks, battery-operated bus routes within that, etc. And that shows you the ground coverage is only about 8% of the total land area that we're talking about. That's the overall master plan from where it emerges. I won't get into the details of the master plan, but that's what it may look like once it's done. The work has just started on site. One of the most important parts about this is that all our water bodies, the earth that comes out is being used to manufacture the block that we are using to build this. And so the balance between where we take out the earth and use it with water is part of the construction system as such. The other part is that the whole way that it is designed is to cut down on energy loads. So conditioned space and is layered in between several layers of buildings. The periphery buildings are all service buildings within which you get the main usable areas which are cooled down. And they are also symbolically linked to the fact that they look, the negative space formed within them is a gestalt shift to a stupa. It's composed of service walls, gateways, climate towers, and learning towers, and these four elements, essentially in their variations, put together, make the kind of spaces that we are talking about, of controlling the light, of cooling the place, and yet giving a space that is inside and outside, you would not know the difference. And this is a view of the total academics spine from the lake that we are forming in the center. An important part of this is the fact that we have an outreach center, and outreach centers that are distributed in not only the 5 villages abutting us, in several other villages, where we are working out a network of our energy needs by using the waste that they generate and recycling that on our campus. So whether it's biomass, whether it is human waste or animal waste, we have done studies. I'll take another minute. Whether we have people, buffaloes, goats, chickens, pigs, all of them within a radius of 4 kilometers can supply all of us. And we look at this, that in terms of energy emissions, the carbon footprint that we have, this becomes the most effective as such. Instead of talking about high tech, we are saying cow tech, and we have the world's quarter of the world's population of cows in our country. So, with that, I come to the last slide, which shows the last one on the extreme, your extreme right, shows the kinds of structures that are influenced by the ruins that are there within which we are building. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv, for your wonderful presentation where you sort of tried to connect nature with man-made architecture. We tried to compare the ecosystem with that of the man-made architecture and the learnings from the religious rituals. I guess we will have some discussions on your paper and the following two papers also after the presentations are done. So now I would welcome architect Madhura Prematilake from Sri Lanka. Madhura, principal of TA, that's Team Architrave, Colombo, is a Sri Lankan architect and urban designer. Madhura studied architecture at Moratua and Helsinki and has worked in Sri Lanka, Finland, India, China, Oman, and the Maldives. He has lectured and taught extensively at international conferences and universities. TA have won about 15 design awards, and their work has been published internationally, including in the Pioneer Atlas of Contemporary Architecture, Beyond Power, Architectural Review, Architectural Design, A+U, and Asian Design Destinations. Competitions wins include the Jaffna Cultural Center in 2010 and the new wing of the Colombo Town Hall in 1999. The practice has an ethos of crafted modernity with a strong engagement in creating verdant tropical environments in restricted urban contexts and a questioning approach to the paradoxes of consumption and sustainability. Today, Madhura will be speaking on, as he titles his presentation, The Right to Joy. Please welcome architect Madhura Prematilake.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's wonderful to be back in Jaipur again. I didn't think I would have such a distinguished audience, so I'm a little bit overawed. The theme of this conference, the architecture, this is just to show where I'm from so that we have some geographic relationship. The theme of this conference seems to intrigue everybody. And the question, of course, arises, happiness for whom? Nevertheless, in keeping with the theme, I coincidentally titled my presentation, The Right to Joy. Now, the theme of this session is sustainability or sustainable architecture. And my approach to this is completely probably different to the other two presenters, because I'm talking about the relevance, the social relevance of architecture and architects as a key to the sustainability of architecture and architects. I'm looking a little bit outside the conventional definitions of sustainable architecture, because I want to talk about how architecture needs to be relevant to society to be sustainable. One of the greatest difficulties I personally face in tackling different kinds of work is applying the same criteria or the same standards when we work with different kinds of projects. Moving between public and private, or low budget and high budget, there is always a difficulty in applying the same benchmarks, the same paradigms to different types of people and situations that you're dealing with. And I'm not talking about space standards or construction standards. I'm referring to the things that we architects tend to proudly claim that these are the things that only architects can do. The things like sensory stimuli and spiritual dimensions, which we claim to be able to bring to our work. These aspects of joy. So my question, and this question is not to you really, it is to me. Do we bring the same attention to these aspects of joy when we design, for example, a high-budget building, and also when we design a block of, say, developer housing where we are under tremendous pressure from a developer to achieve a certain thing at a certain cost, or a factory building where every square meter needs to be taken a maximum use of. So I therefore started in the course of doing different kinds of work, and I certainly don't do the work on the kind of scale that Rajiv talked about. This is minuscule in comparison. Nevertheless, I started to set down for myself certain criteria that I believe that any work of architecture must fulfill. And I ended up with this. It is a bill of rights, not for architects, but for people who use architecture, people who are our clients or users or victims. And conversely, it serves as a checklist for architects. So, the bill says that architecture, that any work of architecture shall provide for every person who inhabits the building certain rights. The right to physical and emotional well-being, the right to public open space, to live within community, to be within easy reach of public space and amenities, the right to private open space, because it is not enough to have public, but private open space does not need to be large or vast. It can be gardens, courtyards, it can be a simple balcony or a terrace. The right to interact with nature via those open spaces. So, which means you need not have the greatest view in the world, but you should be able to see something from your little balcony. So via views and vistas. The right to fresh air, which we take for granted, which is increasingly becoming not a given. So when you book a hotel room in Singapore, you have to specially book a room which has a window, otherwise you draw the curtain and find that there's nothing behind it. The right to feel the breeze and or the warmth, the right to natural light, and the right to experience sunrise and sunset, which means the right to experience the passing of the day and the seasons. The right to personalize, so that every user in every enormous scheme who has a little space in it has the right to make it his or her own, and the right to control the relationship between inside and outside, which means that the architect gives you a way to relate to the outside, but you are able to control whether it is open, closed, half open, shaded, screened, or what you do with it at different times. The right to dignity, the right to privacy, the right to age with dignity, the right to an environment that will age gracefully, because most buildings look great as soon as they're done, and then they look terrible after a decade. The right to cope with one's disabilities. The right to build with what you have, to use one's own skills and resources as far as possible. The right to affordability. And this is where it becomes a little more philosophical: the right to grow, the right to hope, and the right to joy. I will show a few of our projects, and I'm not claiming to have achieved any or even part of this. But the projects are deliberately mixed up and disarranged to provide a contrast between projects which are work which is public and private and low budget and high budget. The Bill of Rights was drawn up in retrospect, having looked back at what we did. And it serves now, hopefully, as a checklist for what we should do going forward. The first project is a rather old one. It was finished about 17 years ago. It's a bakery on the busiest street in Colombo. It's a rather chaotic environment. And the institution, the bakery itself, is more than 100 years old. It's about 110 years since it, so it's a third generation family business. It not only is a bakery, but it is it's a social meeting place. So there's a very strong overlap between the public and the private, because this is not just the place where you go to buy your bread, it is the place where you go to meet your neighbors, catch up on the gossip, and meet up in the neighborhood. So for this building, which has such kind of open relationship with the society it inhabits, we use these wayside boutiques as inspiration, because in these buildings, which you find, well, increasingly less, but traditionally, by the street, there is a facade of wooden planks, which is taken away in the morning and not replaced till it closes at night. And during the work day, there is no facade. It's a facade-less building. And the functions which are inside flow out onto the street, and the activities on the street go into the building. So it's a facade-less building. So we adapted the same idea to this. So on the ground and the first floor, which is where it relates to the street, it is facade-less. There are roller shutters which go up at 4 o'clock in the morning and are open throughout the day. So in order to screen this after this, we used a system of construction scaffolds for two reasons. One is because we were building beyond the building line and therefore had to do something temporary. And secondly, because it also serves as a thing to hang all your signage and your air conditioning and all of that. This is now on the roof terrace. Inside this 100-year-old bakery, there were some old brick ovens, which we tried to preserve by building the structure as a lightweight steel structure with span over it. And so now on the factory floor, so to speak, the old brick ovens sit next to their kind of stainless steel descendants. To contrast with that, this is a cultural center which is being built in Jaffna, which is in the where for 35 years was the center of the civil war in Sri Lanka. And this building is being done in the center of the city, right next to the public library, which is the most revered, the most important public building for the people of Jaffna. The building, by the way, is a gift from the government of India. What you see on the left is the public library, and what you see on the right is the cultural center. And because the cultural center is so large in comparison to the public library, it was destined to overshadow the public library, which, although it is quite revered and respected, was now going to be overpowered by this. So what we did was we gave up our frontage, our formal frontage, to create a colonnade in front of our building, which is picking up all the elements from the older building and, in fact, extending its presence. So you see the library on the left and our building on the right, which picks up this colonnade, and our building is then placed behind it. And the buildings wrap around a public space, which, so there's an auditorium and a learning tower on the other side, and the public space then opens up to a street and to a lake. So this is the colonnade which picks up and extends the presence of the library. And behind that, you see in the section here, the separation of that colonnade from the building which is behind it, which is the new building which is behind it is steel and timber and glass, but the colonnade is a repetition of the old one. So behind this, facing the public square, is a completely new center of public life, and it's a very political statement. The idea is to create an indefensible public space, because this is very much part of the whole movement for reconciliation post-war. The public space then steps down as an amphitheater to a pedestrian street, which opens to the lake, on which we hope to have events on a floating stage. This project is a village which was built for tsunami victims in the deep south of the country. The tsunami was in 2004. It was a village with which we had some relationships before the tsunami. And when the tsunami came, there were 35 families. It was a small village. All the houses were devastated. 9 people died, mostly the very young and the very old. This was like 3 or 4 days after the tsunami. And the first act was one of helping people as human beings rather than as architects, of helping them to stabilize their lives, getting them bicycles so that they could go back to their homes from their refugee center, and then working with the village to establish a plan for the village, the design of the individual houses, and so forth. The site was carved out of a forest reservation, but by the time we got to the site, the bulldozers had already been there, and there was only 1 tree left. So we laid out the village around that tree. So what you see hatched in the middle is the village square, which is around that mango tree. And the houses are in clusters of 6. There is a village forest at the back where they replanted the forest, and part of the forest. There is a space in the center for community buildings, and because there was excess space, we did a cricket ground, which could then be shared with adjoining villages as well. And the buildings are extremely simple. We went to buildings in the neighborhood for inspiration for the type of materials we use. And really, other than keeping it extremely simple, the main idea was to have these 2 verandas, one in front and one at the rear, and the rear one being really the more active one, where the kids could play while the mother would be in the kitchen, which is next to it, and also have all the wet areas in one zone at the back. Extremely simple section, built at very low cost, with rainwater collection tanks, built with a lot of voluntary participation, and then one of the most important things to happen was that they grew, most of these people who were fishermen were too traumatized by the event to go back to sea, and they became farmers, and they became organic farmers in this very dry, arid area using rainwater collection. And they personalized these things, and we were happy to be invited to the first wedding that took place in the new village. I'm running out of time, so I'll try to go as fast as I can. This is a house for, it's called the greenhouse because it belongs to a man whose name is Mark Green. It is built on a very steep site, on a very restricted footprint, where we wanted to keep the bulk of control the bulk of the building. So the section that on the left shows how we restricted the footprint by limiting the section. And so the building is on 6 levels because of the steep slope, and it flows. At the arrival level, you don't see anything except this terrace. So the building drops down and is hidden by the trees around it. It nestles really against the trees and draws its protection from, and shade and shelter from being built very close to these very large trees which are on the site, and a few more which we added. I'll go fairly quickly through this. And this project is a private house, a very private house, because it's my own. I know time is up. I'll run through this. The idea here is to build the smallest possible house on the smallest legally allowed plot. So the plot is 150 square meters. The footprint of the house is 7.5 meters by 7.5 meters. And so the plot coverage is 40%. And most of the site is occupied by trees, which is what you see here. So I won't go into the details of the plan, except to say that every space on every level is open on both sides, and it opens east and west so that we catch all the prevailing breezes, but we get all our protection from having this large amount of trees on the plot and around the plot, and creating space for the trees. The main living spaces are on the upper levels, which connect to decks. There are elements such as these gate type of doors which completely connect the inside and the outside. Doors which also become screens and canopies when they're open, which work in the sun and reasonably well in the rain. Double height. Windows open east and west so that you get the sunrise, sunset, moonrise. Recycled old windows picked up from the junk heap, framed within pieces of glass which were left over from the builder's yard, so that every opening is different because we were using leftover pieces of glass. Okay, it does have rooms as well. And the staircase has a central element, not just for movement, but for light. So it catches the light from the east and the west, and at noon it scoops the light down through skylight and bounces it around. A roof terrace which completes it. So just to return to the Bill of Rights, we certainly don't claim to have followed this. We are probably violating most of this. But these are lessons we have kind of learned in this process. And it is a goal which we would like to aspire to. It is a bill which we would like to place before anybody who's willing to listen to it as a recognition of the things that we should be thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhura, for showing us your spectacular projects and also triggering a new innovative idea to look at the buildings and look at the rights of the people who are going to use that. Your presentation reminded me of Michael J. Fox and the Back to the Future sort of thing. What I believe is that all these rights were maintained by our forefathers. They never had the problems. The problem started when men started building. So the easiest solution is to go back to the past and enjoy the abundance of nature, but that's not possible. We need to rethink about how we can keep our planet livable and sustainable. Anyway, that's the discussion we'll be enjoying after our third presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sevin Yildiz is a professor at the Urban Studies program of Bernard Columbia Colleges at the Columbia University in New York City. She teaches undergraduate students from all over the world about how the ongoing interplay between the processes of global urbanization and planning of grand-scale infrastructure are shaping our planet at an unprecedented scale. Her research focuses on the expansion strategies of metropolitan regions, reclamation practices of ecological fringes, and the strategies through which people use the resultant lands and places. Originally trained as an architect in Istanbul and worked as a practicing architect, Dr. Yildiz moved to studying city planning at the global scale with her graduate studies and professional work in Europe and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, over to Dr. Sevin Yildiz for the third and last presentation of the session.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry about the first image. It's not such a happy moment, but I promise you it will end with an optimistic note. But I'm immensely happy to be back in India, and I'm also very honored with very distinguished audience here attending this well-attended session. Well, today what I'm presenting is slightly different from the previous presentations, which were mainly made up of some architectural works. This presentation also comes from my larger research on land practices and changing metropolitan regions. My main study is in New York and New Jersey, but I've had the chance to look at also Mumbai and Tokyo in this context, how cities are expanding and negotiating land uses in their ecological fringes. So I think this will fit in a different way, and we will have some opportunity to discuss further on. So today I want to bring this presentation on risk. In the United States, we are at a transformative moment in architectural production and also in urban planning, where risk has become an active agent in design processes. And this shift happened, I must say, in maybe the past 10 years. So I've seen the change, the paradigmatic shift from a more sustainability-based and centered understanding to a resiliency understanding. And I will also problematize it and discuss it a little bit, what it means. So this first image is taken after Superstorm Sandy. I don't know how many of you could follow that, but it was a devastating environmental disaster for the entire northeastern seaboard, including New York City. And that created a moment of thinking and pause for a lot of designers and planners on how to move next. And I think it's important at this point where sustainability discourse is so well adopted, so widely used by different scales of governments, different scales of organizations, architectural task forces. It's a moment to stop and think what it means and how it's disrupted. So risk actually comes into play with this discussion. Of course, I'm actually feeling a little self-conscious about this because telling it to an audience coming from South Asia, most of the attendees are from South Asia, I mean, there's no risk, no need to explain what it means, because most of these countries have lived with risk and have built resilient communities over centuries, and including my own home country, Turkey. So it's interesting to come back to this idea, because it's a crisis moment in the so-called modern Western world. So we here are always grappling with constraints, land constraints, crises, environmental crises, insufficiencies. So this actually is not a very new thing for most of us. But I think it's important to recognize that the societies which we look up to for innovation, planning ideas, and some kind of inspiration is having a difficult moment to reconcile this idea of how to live with risk. And this slide is from a famous photographer when he did a piece on Bangladesh, and how people are actually dismantling and moving their buildings as the tide comes in, and go and adapt to different living strategies. And I find it profoundly interesting. And also the earlier presentations show that these societies have a deep understanding of hydrological systems. I mean, people understand how streams work in tandem with rivers, how water harvesting works. So these are all very new to some of the cities in North America. It's a kind of an irony, because they've been so long removed and specialized in different ways that they can't go back to the ways of actually understanding nature. So I'm going to present that today. So my main question is, how can architects understand risk's role in their design processes? So when we design, we are trained in architectural schools to understand architectonics. We aim to have stable buildings. We don't necessarily plan for collapse, failure, breakdown. Those are all daunting scenarios for us, because we don't necessarily want to talk about that, right? Because we don't necessarily want to be known as the architect whose building collapsed during an environmental disaster. Although Minoru Iwasaki, the poor, unfortunate person, has 2 buildings destroyed in the United States in different types of disasters, and I always tell it to my students that it's okay sometimes to be also known for that. So how can architects understand risk? I'm also saying that because in the so-called Western societies, risk has been managed by financial institutions. You would go to New York, a place like New York or London, all the financial security firms have risk management for aviation, for buildings, for neighborhoods. Risk management is so deeply embedded into understanding money-related issues, but architects tend to stay away from these discussions and don't necessarily indulge into risk talks. So I think this is a good moment to think about that. And it's also interesting because here in this part of the world, in Turkey as well, sustainability has become a new buzzword. It's an all-encompassing, very blanket, and an easy way green strategy, but not many people know the boundaries of it. There are different sustainable strategies from a building level to a block level or a city level. So it's also a little bit vague in the sense that it means something. And sustainability doesn't necessarily mean risk, because a sustainable community should be safe, right? Safe and accommodating the future users and resourceful. So it doesn't necessarily talk about disruption. But when these, and especially environmental disasters started happening more often because of the climatic changes, people start thinking about, okay, sustainability is not enough to cover a lot of things. We have to talk about working under risk and working under pressure, and how we can actually kind of reconcile this. So what element is what makes resilience different than sustainability is bouncing back. So resilience in the United States is about bouncing back from a failure. So you fail, and then you are on your feet immediately because of that and that kind of precautions. But it recognizes failure. It says, okay, we failed, we were hit badly, or we were attacked, but let's jump back. So the resilience is, in a way, is more welcoming to break down than sustainability, which creates a huge, I would say, paradigmatic shift. So when you come to think of it, and I will exemplify this with a very recent case study in New York very soon, but I want to actually bring some discussions and say, maybe as architects who are not involved in this discussion, because as I said, financial bankers are dealing with risk, civil engineers are dealing with risk, but architects are in their own world, and where I am from actually, designing buildings as if these things don't happen. So I think we first have to recognize that equilibrium sometimes cannot happen. Sometimes we might fail. Sometimes happiness is disrupted, but it doesn't mean that it's forever. And resilience is giving us this idea of developing solutions for those moments. And also as architects, we were trained to recognize multiple scales. So we are working on a wet space in a bathroom, but we also understand how static works with engineers. So with site scale, we understand how a building is connected to the grid. So we shift back and forth between different scales. And this new understanding requires scalar abilities. And I think that's why architects are actually at an advantage, because we can employ our own training coming from architectural education to recognize the scalar changes, and we would be able to work with different teams and different professionals and experts on multiple things. And also, we should be more proactive in jumping in and developing solutions. We leave some of these technical solutions to technical experts like civil engineers, but it's also a moment for us to kind of go for innovation. So my case study is looking at what happened after Sandy. And if you know about this, impact was colossal in Sandy. Over 8.5 million people were out of power, and there were lots of cancellations of flights. I mean, the entire northeastern seaboard, which is basically the heart of the United States for economic reasons, they were disrupted. So disruption happened, and that was devastating for many people. And disruption happens regularly in the United States. September 11 attacks, Hurricane Katrina, so this is not the first time, but this regularity pushed people to think about developing new strategies. And these are some images showing the devastation that was caused by Superstorm Sandy, which actually was designated as first as a tiny storm, and then quickly into hurricane, and then superstorm. It also shows our vulnerability of understanding how these environmental crises might actually amplify and turn into colossal things in just mere days or hours. And because of this, a lot of people lost their homes, a lot of people couldn't go to work, and also financial damage was very huge. And the New York subways, that most of you might be familiar with, were inundated with water. They became aquariums for many days. People could not go to work, and it showed also the transportation's vulnerability, and citywide efforts started saying that let's prevent this from happening. We cannot allow this to happen to us again. So strategies were So state governments started initiating, with the help of FEMA and other organizations, recommendations. And I just took the portion which might be relevant for us and designers and architects. So the state government said, let's do the land use decisions to enable people and property to withstand future storms. And then also government adopt comprehensive risk assessments that considered long-range sea level rise. So they were recognizing that this might happen again. And also this admission of the risk was the first step, saying that, yes, this might happen again. Let's start thinking about new systems. American Institute of Architects also started recommending things to their own members. So interestingly, they developed task forces right after Sandy and said, let's do better simulation of models of water, which brings me back to the first presentation where I say there is a profound understanding of hydrological systems in this part of the world. So Americans actually called for a plea for, let's better understand the water systems and lost wetlands and river streams and all those things. And also new national references for building codes and building construction, which is the moment of innovation that I was talking about. So the case study that I am choosing is actually the one I'm writing a book on, New Jersey Meadowlands. And as you can see, it's right across from Manhattan, right across from Central Park, highlighted in the light. So after Superstorm Sandy happened, the American government under Barack Obama, released funding for rebuilding. And this was also a colossal thing on the federal level. The government recognized the need to organize architects. And this was the first time in the American architectural world where federal funding was coming from the government for the architects to design some new solutions. And this was a big transformation. And because of that, many commissions picked up some sites, and this is one of the sites in and around New York Harbor. And I'm just going to show you briefly how they incorporated risks. And as you can see from the project's name, this is a project by MIT's Zeus, Urbanistan Delta Works, and many people. So this understanding that architects should not work by themselves, but as part of a task force, as part of an integrated system, was first thing that was done. And all the teams on all selected sites, this is just one of the 6 sites, worked like this. So Oma Ram Koolhaas has a site, but nobody knows the project by the name of Oma. It is Oma plus 6 more partners. So this shows that this kind of multi-level, multi-scalar approach was necessary and was recognized immediately. So these projects are still in development. They're not final. So what I'm showing here is kind of advanced draft versions. But as you can see, they worked on transects, recognizing different levels of ecological systems and developing new typologies. And as for architecture, you can see that some of the edge conditions actually is directly related to architectural production. So new building typologies on stilts, some kind of breakdown of block and lot structures. These were some of the things that were brought in by this understanding. And as you can see, there is this kind of terrain shift from water to land, from wetlands. And this also puts a smile on my face because there is this fascinating work by Anuruddha Mathur and Dilip Kunha from many years ago on Mumbai. The book is called Soak. And they did a similar study understanding how the terrain shifts from water to the land edge. So this is not new, but it's new to the part of the world that I live in. And also resilience strategies, as you can see, they don't say that we will block out. We will have to adapt. That's the new understanding. We will have to have smooth edges. We will have to expect and let the water come in. And you can see that transition, especially in the cross-sectional works, and see how buildings take a position in relevance or in accordance to these different terrain structures. This is, I think, an innovation moment. This is a moment for architects to come up with new typologies and to put their own stamp in, say, and not just letting it for engineers to decide. And this is another proposal for subways, inflatable structures so that they would be blocked if in case a superstorm hits again. So this whole idea about resilient plug, but they were designed by civil engineers in West Virginia University. And I'm saying, why not? We take some kind of a claim in this. Archigram talked about it in the 1960s, and everybody was looking at they're fascinated by infrastructure. But it's a moment to go back to some of those earlier inspirations and say, well, maybe as architects we can take place in this and make these not just technical solutions, but also some steps to innovate architecture. And the last thing I'll show is this basics. So in innovation, FEMA and the federal government required, and state governments required buildings to be raised. So you heard it right. Existing buildings had to be raised in situ. And there is this new real estate, developer field. If you are interested in coming and working in New York, you can, I think, find a lot of clients how to raise the buildings in place. So there are these interesting, innovative, Corbusier would be proud, I think, and would say, I told you so. But it's the idea of raising and elevating buildings, and they are done in many different fashions, and they're not most of the time even on the coastline, in the internal areas. They are still raised. So I think this is also a moment for architects to step in and say, let's design systems in tandem with other specialists and innovate this and how to raise buildings in place. And as you can see, there are various forms of doing it, but most of the work is done by developers or construction people or engineers, and I think our presence is missing from this whole debate, so we can claim something on this as well. And as a kind of a sum up, land use, programming, and programming meaning double uses, like the one we've seen in Bangladesh. Sometimes you use the building for one purpose, sometimes for if the conditions of the terrain doesn't allow, you use it for some other purpose. So this type of shift in our understanding the brief, the program, the floor structure, the basic tenets of the statics of the building would also, I think, prevent and provide a great future potential. So I hope I was on time.
Thank you, Jevin, for your precise presentation, and of course enlightening us with another sort of issue which we can call, it's a call of an hour, because yes, we talk about sustainability, but today we need to take sustainability towards another dimension, the resilience architecture. When we talk about resilience, we have to be aware about the risks associated with these natural disasters, natural calamities, and of course these are the results of this climate change. So these are all realities. So architects should think in different dimensions, not only be limited to the design which would show the aesthetics or the planning aspects. There has to be inputs from architects in terms of having safe buildings in association with the engineers and other professionals. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are done with these three excellent presentation focusing sustainability in the presenter's own way. I think we would now have all the distinguished presenters up on the stage, and we have some time to discuss their presentations and perhaps have some questions to the presenters that they would be requested to respond to. So may I now call upon the stage all the three presenters, Rajiv Katpalia, Madhura Prematileke, and Seven Ildiz. I think all of us have enjoyed the presentation, and I personally liked, because the presentation triggered three different ways how we should look at the architecture of current times to be sensitive to the coming future, to prepare ourselves to be resilient towards a sustainable planet. So, I don't know, just to generate a discussion, I would like to come from Madhura. I just have one observation or sort of a comment on your presentation, that you tried to establish or propose the Bill of Rights, and you have all those natural aspects of or phenomena that are required for our healthy being or healthy life. And in our urban areas, we really suffer from scarcity of fresh air, fresh light, sunset, sunrise, all those nice things that we would love to have. And yes, of course, it's the architect's responsibility, the planner's responsibility. But interestingly, the projects you have shown, they do not suffer from this scarcity. You are fortunate that you are designing in a land or a site that has got abundance of nature, the breezes, the lights, the vegetation, that water. But the place where I come from, it's a contrast from the place you are working. So what would be your suggestion if you were given a site in the dense situation of a city like Dhaka?
Actually, the Bill of Rights comes from the guilt of living in such a nice place. And the very question you asked, I experimented with at a small workshop at the Bengal Institute in Dhaka, where we worked with a group of young architects and the exercise was to apply this Bill of Rights to their environments. And there were a whole series of very interesting interpretations, because the idea is not to, the elements of the bill come from the environments that you saw in my work, yes. But the intention is to apply them to these dense, difficult, urban areas where, that's why I'm talking about private open space as a little balcony, and a vista as the ability to see the sky from your balcony, maybe over somebody's head, through someone else's property, and so forth. So it's about applying, and I don't have work to show how this is applied, and that is my failing. I wish I did. If you would give me the opportunity, I would gladly participate. But the idea is to apply this in those difficult situations. Apply this in the instance of Rajiv's work, for example, about the people who would live there, and I think it would fulfill all those criteria. But maybe also apply it to, I suppose, the growth that would happen around your work, because it would attract, it would become a magnet for this. And then apply it to the people who are coping with the, say, the effects of Sandy, or the people who are affected, that these are extremely basic criteria, which we tend to forget about when we are looking at achieving certain numerical equations and bottom line accomplishments.
Thank you, Madhura. Coming to Rajiv, your presentation tried to connect sort of society, culture with nature, the forest. And what I thought was a sort of a different approach to built environment, where you're trying to connect the religions, the rituals of religion, and that of the nature of a tree. So my query was, do you think the general architects who are in practice, maybe in this country, or so to speak, our region, do you think the architects are really aware of these sort of relations between the nature, culture, heritage, religion, and architecture? Do we see enough reflection of this philosophy in the practice of architecture in the current times, if I may ask?
I think that's a fairly provocative question from the point of view that I can't speak for everybody, but I can start somewhere, and I start with myself. Whether the rest will follow or the rest will do or not, I think that's open-ended. And I think we all know the state of things. I mean, our cities wouldn't be in the mess they are unless we started addressing all of these things and thinking about it. So, as a matter of fact, our practice also is involved with city planning at many scales. And obviously, I wouldn't be presenting all of it here, but it is to do when a metro system comes in, then how do you sort of start thinking about the kinds of changes a city needs to go through, and can that be used as a starting point for larger changes in the city fabric? Because the metro rail is coming in, let's say, triggered by the fact that now the new mantra is connectivity, public transport, right? But can you use that as an excuse to do many more things that our cities haven't looked at for the past 70 years? So I think that's where I think there's a role for architects to talk about innovation, to talk about a vision, and share that vision. How successful we'll be in resolving that in one go, and that's where the issue of resilience comes in. I think there are going to be several times that we're going to make mistakes, but finally things will get better. And each time you make a mistake, hopefully you learn from it. So I look at the way our cities are sort of in transition at the moment.
Thank you. In fact, what I was trying to focus on was the awareness of the architects. I mean, based on your practice and experience, do you think the architects in your place that you work are aware enough of this scenario? That
Definitely.
the connection of religion, rituals, and
I think
nature.
definitely it needs to be expanded upon. So I wouldn't say that everybody is aware of it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But definitely, I think that needs to be reflected upon.
Thank you, Rajiv. Now over to Dr. Ildiz. You are talking about risks, and you have also, I'm sure you have some experiences of the risk awareness of. You showed some slides from Bangladesh, where I come from. Anyway, so you are trying to propose special awareness of the architects and other professionals to propose regulations to be aware. But my experience says, that's very interesting. The people in our country, they have very sort of reluctant sense about risks. You know, the storms coming in, people are still rowing their boat. They do not go back to the banks. The tsunami signals are there. They do not want to leave their homestay. They do not want to leave their cattle. So, don't you think, in addition to creating awareness to the professionals, a lot of other efforts to be taken up to sort of educate and inspire and make people, the general people, aware of this scenario, the sense of risk or risk assessment. What do you think about it?
Thank you. This is a good question, because this was a problem with especially Hurricane Katrina. People were living in awful floodplains. They knew about that, and unfortunately they were hit really hard. But we also have to recognize that this is a humane issue. This is not just a technical solution, as I said. So people have attachment to their homes, to their places, to their fields. And it's not easy to transport them from one place to another, saying that, oh, this is safer to live here, you have to move now. It didn't work in Katrina. People did not want to leave the ninth ward, which was really, really badly hit. So I think that gives us another aspect or a dimension to say, if people don't want to leave, if they still want to be somehow tied to their lands, what can we do? I mean, there was this interesting discussion with my urban design students this year, and we came up with a solution, like if Katrina victims were given opportunities to still use their lands of their homes in creative ways for commerce, for other things, but would be given homes somewhere else, would that work differently? So they would still have ownership over the use of land, but they would be encouraged to move somewhere else. So I think that's where architectural innovation comes into place, to find not only building strategies, but strategies about moving people, about interim solutions from one place to another. I mean, we can't expect, the Bill of Rights is the people have right to choose where they live, right? Even if it's risky. And in most cases, they do choose to live in risky places. In many metropolises of the world, people are tied to their livelihoods and incomes to where they live. They don't want to leave these places because they don't want to also lose their jobs. So if this is the reality, I'm just saying we have to maybe find a way to kind of work with the reality, work around the reality, because people have been, tried to convince in these matters for decades now for different reasons, and we all know that, it's a different problem. So yeah, that's what my take on this issue is. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it the same reality in the West? Like, is this part of
I mean, Katrina, in New Orleans, people who were the poorest section and segment of the population in New Orleans were living in risky areas, and they, unfortunately, that wasn't their choice. I mean, years of racial segregation pushed them to choose. I mean, it's the same thing. Poorest of the poor always are pushed. It's easy to blame the victims, but they are pushed to live in those places. So, I mean, how do we reconcile that? And they build attachment to their places over decades. So when you move them, you wipe out their social ties. So you wipe out their economic ties. And that's the same in the Western countries, or so-called Western countries.
Thank you, Shavin. Now I guess, ladies and gentlemen, we can open the floor for and invite questions or queries that anyone of you has to any of the speakers. Could someone get the mic to the person with the question?
Who's interested?
And I would like to request you to introduce yourself before you have your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Will Glover. I'm a historian, a lapsed architect, but I've found this whole panel very stimulating. And one of the things that I think was a nice tension between Shevin's presentation and the presentation by Rajiv and Madhura was the plot boundary. There's a Karachi planner and architect, Arif Hassan, many of you will know his name, who says in Pakistan today there is no more planning, there are simply projects. By which I think he meant that however nicely we resolve a Bill of Rights or a set of ecological concerns in our project, unless there's some linking between projects to constitute something more like planning, although planning is probably also a term that's not adequate. It seems to me that Shevin was talking about a kind of architectural intervention that moved beyond the plot line, that helps to constitute a link in a more systemic way. And I wondered if the architects would comment on, let's say, the tyranny of the property boundary.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. But I don't know whether we spelled this out enough. Probably we didn't. That's the reason for the question. In my case, all of the things I'm talking about is a reaction from within your plot to what goes on beyond your plot. So my projects don't show it, but the idea of the bill is that when applied to situations such as the one that she showed in New Orleans, that you apply those ideas to the confines of the plot because that's where you have the ability to act. But these are trying to react to issues which are far beyond your plot. And the more you are compressed within your plot, the less means you have within your plot, the more you are reliant on what is outside.
Even though I showed things which are still within a larger plot boundary, I think most of the issues which we've been involved with and I was trying to convey was that you have to have linkages outside. Natural systems are not restricted to plots. They exist in many, or whether it's earthquakes or it's droughts, all of that which you have to be resilient to in some ways and you have to react to when you're building up certain, let's say, sustainability issues have to be connected to the larger picture. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is in squatters and slums where there are no boundaries as such. You're actually at the interface of many, many boundaries and what's left over is really what you're working with. So I think the question is well-founded. Perhaps one of the things that seminars like this should be talking to is not just fellow architects or planners, but to the political, the political class as well as the bureaucrats. We often are restricted to an audience that's people in the profession. Most of them are believers anyways. So I mean, it's who are blind and are standing next to an elephant and they are trying to figure out what is this animal, because one has a leg, one has a trunk, and one has the tail, and they all describe the different parts that they're holding, and yet they're actually talking about the same animal. So the other part that I think is important to understand is at what scale are we talking about when we talk about sustainability is a sort of a buzzword that's used very loosely. And I say that everything that in some ways makes things better for many rather than just one. But sometimes it is actually the inverse of that too. And we accept that there are going to be these differences. So So I don't see the idea of defining it or let's say being able to put a metric to this exercise. And I think that's a place where we end up failing, because engineering very often talks about metrics, and I think architecture talks about a larger idea. So is there a way to sort of move between the two rather than to hold on to this? Obviously there are real problems and real issues that we need to sort of also move together. So I would say that the definition is all of this and yet more, and it is none of this at times.
Well, I agree with that, and I also think, for me personally, sustainability becomes a dangerous paradigm when it is this kind of status, heightened status that we have to achieve without questioning. And many governments around the world are now using that. Like once they were using the urban growth model or theory, where they were saying the cities are engines of economic growth, we have to do this and that. Now it is replaced by sustainability, and sometimes what they mean are actually not what's sustainable, but they still use that. So, and also the expectation of a black box that everything should be perfectly fine-tuned and working and no problems, and that's unrealistic for me. And we see this in these examples that systems are disrupted. I mean, Japanese have been rebuilding their cities over and over with disruptions, and every time there's a moment of opportunity. I don't want to call opportunity because it's human misery after all, it's sad, but they take a break of refreshing and thinking about it. So sustainability to me sounds like there is this end goal where everything works perfectly, and we need to achieve that. It leaves out uncertainty, and that's my main problem with that. And I think that's why in the United States, cities are actually moving away from that. In the past, I would say 8-10 years, if you look at any city documents, the design manuals, sustainability is replaced by resilience. In New York City design guidelines, it's rarely used now. It's mostly replaced by resilience concept because of this. And resilience has also this danger of becoming another buzzword. So we also have to be cautious about that. But I think it's like one step different than what we were doing. But we needed that sustainability discussion from 1987, the Brundtland report, so that we could open all these up. So I think I find it helpful in that for a historic moment, but I think it actually sometimes makes things very vague. Yeah, that's my take on it.
The way I look at your question, which was if sustainability is at its end state or is it a process? Well, even if you think sustainability as a buzzword, but it is a reality, and we need this word. And I think it's always a continuous process to be sustainable. And it's a never-ending process to become sustainable. And it is, to me, it's not a paradigmatic shift. It is a change to the next state, maybe, depending on the status of our surrounding. Sometimes we want to be sustainable, sometimes beyond that we want to be resilient, one step beyond sustainability. So yes, it is a process, and we have to carry this forward while we are in the practice, because this is again the role of the architects and engineers and professionals to guide the society and our habitat to grow in future. Thank you. Yes, Nimishji, architect Nimish Patel.
Hi, my name is Nimish Patel. I'm a practicing architect. While I agree that sustainability cannot be defined precisely, as Rajiv said, there is a lot that goes about it, I still want to further Ahmed's question. The problem is not about how to define or to what extent to define, but when unsustainable things are palmed off to us as architects and to clients in general, how does one arrive at a decision or a judgment that this is unsustainable being palmed off as sustainable? In our country, in this country, I cannot even count the number of unsustainable things that are being palmed off as green, as sustainable, and so on and so forth. So, to me, the dilemma is how and where does a common man draw a line, and where does even a professional draw a line, and how?
Anyone to respond?
I suppose this is a reason for moving now from the buzzword sustainable, because it's got so abused. Moving to another set of terms which will most likely get abused in time. But at the moment, sustainability, I feel, has had its day, because it's now been taken over by marketing interests who are using it as a label with all the point systems and the star systems to sell different types of technology rather than actually addressing the issues. So this issue really needs to be dealt with at a conceptual level, where we abandon this term which seems to have gone past its use by date and move to something else, but in the knowledge that that too will be abused.
I think if I can add to what architect Nimish Patel was trying to refer to, if I don't use the word sustainable, if I may be allowed to use the word maybe a desirable society or a desired society. A desired society is defined not only by what it creates, but by what it refuses to destroy. So I think that could be one way to define that the things that are unsustainable, if we can get rid of those from our society, that may be another approach to become, to make a desirable or desired society. That's how someone may look at the issue. Thank you. I think we are we need to come to the end of the session. I take the privilege to thank all the speakers to come over here and present their research and practice works. And I also thank the august audience over here, the distinguished audience. Your presence made this session really successful and enjoyable. So thank you once again for being here. Now we are going off to lunch.